Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Ryan Mitchell, and at 6:47 a.m. my radio crackled with the call that would change my life and my understanding of reality itself. Unit 23, we have a code yellow missing person, Yosemite Valley Sector 7. Female, 22 years old, Sierra Campbell. Last contact 1800 hours yesterday. Dispatch's voice cut through the pre-dawn silence of the ranger station like a blade through fabric. I was still fumbling with my coffee, the bitter liquid scalding my tongue as I reached for the radio. Unit 23 copy, dispatch. Details on the missing person? Archaeology student from UC Berkeley. Solo camping permit for research purposes. Missed check-in call with family last night. Vehicle located at Glacier Point Trailhead, tent and gear still at registered campsite. Family's driving up from San Francisco now. I grabbed my field notebook, scribbling coordinates with hands still shaky from caffeine, and the adrenaline that always came with missing person calls. 3 months into my transfer from Yellowstone, and Yosemite still felt like an alien landscape. The ancient granite faces, the impossible vertical walls, the way shadows fell wrong in certain valleys. Nothing like the geothermal predictability of Wyoming. Copy, dispatch. Estimated time missing? Approximately 14 hours. Weather service shows storm system moving in this afternoon. Search window is narrowing. 14 hours. In the backcountry, that could mean anything. Injury, exposure, getting turned around on an unmarked trail. But something about this felt different. Maybe it was the way the morning fog clung to the valley floor, refusing to burn off despite the climbing sun. Maybe it was how quiet the forest had become, as if every bird and squirrel was holding its breath. I loaded my pack with the standard SAR kit. First aid supplies, emergency blanket, radio batteries, GPS unit, water purification tablets. My iPhone showed 2 bars, which would drop to nothing once I hit the tree line. The Garmin GPS was more reliable, but even that got spotty in the deep granite canyons where Yosemite liked to play tricks with satellite signals. The drive to Glacier Point took 45 minutes, my headlights cutting through fog so thick it seemed almost solid. Sierra Campbell's Honda Civic sat alone in the parking area, dew beating on the windshield like tears. I ran her plates, confirmed the registration, then approached the vehicle. Everything looked normal. No signs of forced entry, no blood, no obvious struggle. Her permit was properly displayed on the dashboard. Archaeological survey, indigenous cultural sites. Dr. Patricia Weiss, faculty supervisor. I keyed my radio. Dispatch, Unit 23. Vehicle check complete, no irregularities. Beginning trail approach to registered campsite. Copy, Unit 23. Be advised you have family contact in approximately 2 hours. Mother insisting on joining search effort. The trail from Glacier Point down to the valley floor was a controlled descent through granite switchbacks, each turn revealing more of Yosemite's impossible geometry. But this morning, something felt wrong with the proportions. Distances seemed to stretch and compress randomly. A rock formation I'd passed 10 minutes earlier appeared again around a bend, identical down to the lichen patterns. I stopped, checking my GPS. The coordinates showed I was exactly where I should be, but the landscape disagreed. In Yellowstone, the terrain was honest. Geysers erupted on schedule. Wildlife followed predictable patterns. Trails went where they were supposed to go. Here, it felt like the mountains were watching me, testing my reaction to their geological impossibilities. The fog was getting thicker instead of lifting, which made no meteorological sense. By 9 a.m., the sun should have burned through the marine layer, but instead the mist seemed to be coalescing, taking on shapes that dissolved when I looked directly at them. My radio crackled with static that formed patterns too regular to be random interference. Sierra's campsite was exactly where it should be, according to her permit. But standing there, looking at her perfectly arranged tent, her camp stove still assembled for a breakfast she'd never cooked, I felt the first real touch of something vast and wrong, pressing against the edges of my perception. Her journal lay open on a camp chair, the last entry dated yesterday afternoon. Found the petroglyphs Dr. Weiss mentioned, but they're not just archaeological artifacts. They're describing something active, something that's still here. The symbols match descriptions of a spirit gateway in the 1890s field notes. Going to investigate the cave system mentioned in Blackwood's final report from 1962. Blackwood. The name meant nothing to me, but it should have. Any ranger with more than 3 months in Yosemite would have known to stop reading right there, to call in backup, to get as far away from this sector as possible. But I was new, ignorant, and already being watched by something that had been waiting 60 years for exactly this kind of opportunity. I photographed the journal entry, bagged it as evidence, then began expanding my search pattern. Sierra's tracks were visible in the morning dew, leading away from camp toward a section of the park I'd never explored. According to my topographic map, there wasn't supposed to be a trail in that direction, just granite walls and impassable terrain, but her footprints were clear, accompanied by something that made my blood run cold. A second set of prints, larger, wearing what looked like vintage hiking boots with a tread pattern I didn't recognize. The tracks led to what appeared to be a service trail, unmarked and not on any official map. But it was clearly maintained. Recently cleared brush, drainage ditches properly carved, switchbacks engineered with the skill of someone who understood mountain construction. My GPS started acting erratic, showing my position jumping randomly across the screen before finally displaying 3 question marks where coordinates should be. I keyed my radio. Dispatch, Unit 23. Following tracks from missing person's campsite. Trail condition is unusual. GPS signal compromised. Static filled the channel, then a voice I didn't recognize. Unit 23, this is Unit 17. What's your position, rookie? Unit 17. I'd memorized every ranger call sign for the sector. There was no Unit 17, but the voice sounded official, experienced, using proper radio protocol. Unit 17, I show no record of your assignment. Please identify yourself. Edmund Blackwood, 38 years of service. You must be the new transfer from Yellowstone. Heard you were looking for that archaeology girl. My skin went cold. 38 years of service? That would make Blackwood retirement age, but his voice sounded like a man in his 40s, and something about the radio transmission was wrong. Too clear, no background static, like he was standing right next to me instead of transmitting from miles away. Blackwood, what's your current position? Are you familiar with this sector? More familiar than you can imagine, Mitchell. I've been working these trails since before you were born. Found some sign of your missing person. She's in trouble, son. Deep trouble. But I can guide you to her. The rational part of my mind was screaming warnings. Unregistered trails, GPS failure, radio contacts that didn't exist in the duty roster. But the clock was ticking, weather was moving in, and Sierra Campbell was somewhere in this maze of granite and fog, potentially injured or worse. Unit 17, transmit your coordinates. Coordinates won't help you here, rookie. This is old-growth forest from before the mapping surveys. You need local knowledge. Stay on the trail you're following. Bear northwest at the lightning-struck pine. I'll meet you at the overlook. I should have turned back. Should have called for backup. Waited for additional SAR personnel. Followed proper protocol. But Sierra's journal entry was burning in my evidence bag, and something about Blackwood's voice carried an authority that made questioning him feel like insubordination. The lightning-struck pine was exactly where he'd said it would be. A massive ponderosa split down the middle, its charred trunk forming a natural archway over the trail. But according to every topographical survey, no trees of that size grew at this elevation. The forest around me was changing, transitioning from the familiar mixed conifers of Yosemite to something older, with species I couldn't identify and undergrowth that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at it. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Ryan Mitchell's situation? Comment below. The overlook appeared through the fog like something from a fever dream. It shouldn't have existed. The terrain didn't support this kind of geological formation, and yet here was a perfectly circular clearing surrounded by granite walls that formed impossible angles. My depth perception kept failing, showing me distances that contradicted what my GPS claimed before it had died completely. Edmund Blackwood was waiting for me, and seeing him nearly broke my sanity on the spot. He wore a ranger uniform from the 1960s, perfectly pressed and maintained, with patches and insignia that predated modern Park Service design by decades. But his face was wrong. Not aged like a man in his 70s, but preserved, like a photograph that had been exposed to something that stopped time itself. His eyes held depths that seemed to recede infinitely, and when he smiled, I could see too many teeth. "You made good time, Mitchell. Most rookies get lost on their first trip into the deep forest. Where's Sierra Campbell? She's safe, for now. But she's touched something she shouldn't have. Disturbed a balance that's been maintained for centuries. You want to help her? You need to understand what you're really dealing with." He gestured toward the center of the clearing, where I now noticed a depression in the granite that formed a perfect spiral, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The petroglyphs Sierra had been researching, but seeing them in person was like staring into a kaleidoscope made of madness. The symbols seemed to move, rearranging themselves into configurations that suggested meanings just beyond human comprehension. The Awanichi people knew what this place was, Blackwood continued, his voice taking on harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a human throat. A doorway, a place where the boundaries between realities wear thin. They used it to banish spirits that threatened the living world. But they also knew to leave guardians to make sure nothing came back through. The fog around us was thickening, but it wasn't moving like normal mist. It was flowing upward from the spiral depression, carrying with it whispers in languages that predated human speech. My radio crackled with interference that formed almost words, transmissions from conversations that might have happened decades ago, or might be happening in dimensions adjacent to our own. "You're the guardian," I said, the words falling from my mouth without conscious thought. Was, am, will be. Blackwood's uniform was becoming translucent, revealing glimpses of something underneath that my mind refused to process. "Time works differently here, Mitchell. I've been waiting 60 years for someone like you. Someone new, someone who doesn't know the old warnings. Someone who can help me fix what went wrong." The spiral was pulling at me, not physically but mentally, showing me visions of vast spaces between the stars where ancient intelligences waited with patience that dwarfed geological time. I saw Sierra Campbell standing at the edge of the depression, reaching toward symbols that promised knowledge beyond human limitations. I saw her stepping forward, crossing a threshold that existed in more dimensions than the three my mind could comprehend. "She's not in our reality anymore," Blackwood explained, his voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. "The portal took her, just like it took me in 1962. But unlike me, she's still salvageable, still mostly human. You can bring her back, Mitchell. But first, you have to follow her through." The granite beneath my feet was becoming transparent, revealing depths that extended far beyond the physical dimensions of the earth. Below us, or perhaps above us, or sideways through folded space, I could see a vast cavern filled with structures that violated every principle of architecture and physics. Crystalline formations that sang with frequencies that bypassed my ears and spoke directly to my nervous system. And there, impossibly small in the distance, a human figure in hiking clothes, reaching towards something that would unmake her at the molecular level if she touched it. "The portal feeds on consciousness," Blackwood continued, his form now completely translucent. "It needs thinking beings to stabilize the barrier between dimensions. That's why I'm trapped here, why I've been recruiting others for 60 years. Every person who enters becomes part of the mechanism, their minds used to process the impossible mathematics that keep reality from unraveling completely." I understood, with the kind of terrible clarity that comes just before madness, that I was looking at my future. Sierra Campbell hadn't just gotten lost in the woods. She'd fallen through a crack in the universe itself, into a space where human consciousness was used as organic computing material by intelligences so vast they couldn't perceive individual humans as anything more than useful processing units. "But there's another way," Blackwood whispered, his voice now coming from inside my own skull. The portal needs minds to function, yes, but it also needs someone on this side, someone to guide new consciousnesses through the barrier, someone to serve as a bridge between realities. I've been doing this job for 60 years, Mitchell. I'm tired, so very tired. The choice was simple and horrible. Enter the portal myself, trade my sanity and identity for the chance to pull Sierra back to our reality, probably failing and ending up trapped like her in the impossible geometries below, or take Blackwood's place as guardian, spending eternity luring other minds into the dimensional mechanism while slowly losing my own humanity to cosmic forces that regarded human consciousness as a useful tool and nothing more. Or, there's a third option, I said, the words forming as the thought occurred to me. We destroy it. Blackwood's laughter was like the sound of reality tearing. Destroy it? Mitchell, this portal is older than human civilization. It exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The combined nuclear arsenal of every nation on Earth wouldn't leave a scratch on it. But I was thinking about Sierra's journal, about her archaeological research, about the Awanichi people who had originally created this place. They hadn't built it to be permanent. They'd built it to be controlled, managed, used when necessary, and sealed when dormant. Which meant, the symbols, I said, they're not just decoration, they're instructions, a user interface. Blackwood's form solidified slightly, his attention focusing on me with laser intensity. What are you thinking, rookie? The indigenous people who built this weren't trying to create a permanent portal. They were building a valve, something that could be opened when they needed to banish hostile spirits and closed afterward. There has to be a shutdown sequence. Even if that were true, Blackwood said, but I could hear uncertainty in his voice for the first time. You'd need to understand the language, the specific combination of symbols, and you'd need to activate them from inside the portal itself. The control mechanisms are on the other side of the barrier. I looked down through the transparent granite at Sierra Campbell, still reaching toward the crystalline formations that would consume her consciousness and add it to the portal's processing matrix. She was running out of time. I could see her movements becoming more mechanical, less human, as the dimensional forces began to override her individual will. Then I go through, find the controls, shut it down from the inside. You'll die, Blackwood said. Even if you could figure out the shutdown sequence, even if you could activate it before the portal absorbed your mind, the dimensional collapse would tear you apart at the subatomic level. Maybe, but Sierra lives, and no one else gets lured into this thing. Blackwood stared at me for a long moment, his features shifting between human and something else, something vast and tired and desperately lonely. You really don't understand what you're volunteering for, do you? But I did understand. I understood that I'd been brought here not by coincidence, but by cosmic forces that needed a specific type of person. Someone new enough to the forest to not know the legends, experienced enough as a ranger to navigate impossible terrain, and stubborn enough to choose death over surrender. I'd been selected, groomed, guided to this moment with the precision of a machine that thought in geological time. The portal wanted me to enter, to become part of its consciousness processing system. Blackwood wanted me to take his place as guardian, to spend eternity recruiting other minds for the dimensional mechanism. But what I wanted was to save Sierra Campbell and prevent this cosmic horror from claiming any more victims, which meant the only real choice was no choice at all. I stepped toward the spiral depression, feeling reality begin to fold around me as I approached the threshold. The symbols carved into the granite were becoming three-dimensional, extending through space in directions my eyes couldn't follow. My radio crackled one final time with my own voice, transmitted from a future I might never live to see. Unit 23 to dispatch. Missing person located. Initiating extraction protocol. Behind me, Blackwood called out, "Mitchell, you don't have to do this, there are other ways." But I was already falling through the barrier between dimensions, already feeling my consciousness begin to stretch across impossible geometries as the portal's processing systems began to integrate my mind into their cosmic machinery. The last thing I saw before human perception failed completely was Sierra Campbell turning toward me, her eyes wide with recognition and relief, her hand reaching out to grasp mine across a distance measured in folded space-time rather than physical meters. And in that final moment before the dimensional mathematics tore my sanity into component parts, I understood the truth that Edmund Blackwood had been trying to hide. There was no way to destroy the portal from inside. There was no shutdown sequence, no ancient control mechanism, no escape clause built into cosmic architecture that existed across 17 dimensions. There was only the endless hunger of intelligences so vast they couldn't perceive human consciousness as anything more than useful processing material. And the terrible realization that my heroic sacrifice had accomplished nothing except adding one more mind to their collection. The last transmission from my radio, detected by rangers who would never find my body, was recorded at 11:47 a.m., static that formed almost words, a voice that might have been mine calling out coordinates to a location that didn't exist on any map, warning other rangers to stay away from Blackwood's trail. But warnings are just recommendations, and there are always new rangers, always outsiders who don't know the local legends, always people who think they can save someone by walking into cosmic horror with nothing but good intentions and standard issue equipment. My name is Ryan Mitchell, and I've been waiting in the space between dimensions for someone like you to answer my radio call. Someone new, someone who doesn't know the old warnings, someone who can help me fix what went wrong. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Sierra Campbell. I read every single one. My name is Luke Patterson, and I should have forgotten the case of Austin Miller, but something brought me back to that cursed forest. 3 months. 3 goddamn months since Austin Miller vanished on Trail 847 in the Great Smoky Mountains, and I still wake up at 3 a.m. seeing his mother's face when I had to tell her we were suspending the search. 15 years as a ranger, and I'd never lost someone completely. Not without a body, not without answers. The October wind cut through my jacket as I parked my Ford F-150 at the Cataract Falls trailhead, my breath fogged in the pre-dawn darkness. 42 degrees, humidity at 78%, wind northeast at 12 millimeters. Numbers I could trust, facts that made sense, unlike the phone call that dragged me back here. Ranger Patterson. The voice had been young, nervous. I found something about Austin Miller. Meet me at the trail where he disappeared. The caller hung up before I could ask questions, but something in that kid's voice, terror maybe, made me drive the 2 hours from Gatlinburg at 4 a.m. I strapped on my pack, 35 pounds of gear, including emergency beacon, first aid, water purification tablets, emergency shelter, and my grandfather's compass from Korea. The familiar weight settled against my shoulders like an old friend. My radio crackled. Unit 23, this is base. You're off duty, Luke. What's your 20? Personal business, Sarah. I'll be back by 1400. Copy that. Stay safe out there. If only it were that simple. The trail started normal enough. My headlamp beam cut through morning mist, illuminating familiar landmarks. The split oak at 0.2 miles, the creek crossing at 0.7, the boulder field where we'd found Austin's water bottle. Empty, just like we'd left it. But at mile 1.3, something was wrong. There was a sound, soft, rhythmic, like crying. I stopped, listening. 15 years of ranger training kicked in. Identify, assess, respond. But this sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. A child's sob echoing through trees that shouldn't echo. Hello? I called out. Anyone need help? The crying stopped. Then I saw her. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, stood 20 feet off the trail. White dress, dirty and torn. Dark hair hanging over her face. She wasn't wearing shoes. Hey, sweetheart, I said, using my calm, the victim voice. Are you lost? She looked up. Her eyes were completely black. I can't find my daddy, she whispered. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But I was a ranger. I help people, even when those people make my skin crawl for reasons I couldn't explain. "What's your daddy's name?" I asked, taking a step closer. "Pastor Thorne," she said. "He's waiting for us at the church." My blood turned to ice. There was no church on this trail. I'd hiked every inch of this territory for 15 years. "Where's this church, honey?" She pointed deeper into the woods, away from any marked trail. "That way, Austin went to find Daddy too." "Austin," she said, "Austin." Against every rational thought, I followed her. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Luke Patterson's situation? Comment below. The girl moved through the forest like she was floating. No broken branches under her feet, no disturbed leaves. I stumbled over roots she seemed to pass right through. My GPS started spinning wildly, first showing I was headed north, then south, then directions that didn't exist. "Sweetheart, slow down," I called, but when I looked up, she was gone. I was alone in a part of the forest I'd never seen before. The trees were wrong, too tall, too dark, growing in patterns that hurt to look at. My compass needle spun like a drunken dancer. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the span of 10 minutes. Then I heard the voice. "You came back." I spun around. A man stood behind me, tall, elderly, wearing a black suit that belonged to another century. His smile was warm, grandfatherly. His eyes were the same bottomless black as the little girl's. "I'm Pastor William Thorne," he said. "I've been waiting for you, Luke." "How do you know my name?" "I know many things. I know you're here about Austin. I know you blame yourself for losing him. I know you haven't slept more than 3 hours at a time since September." He was right about everything, but that was impossible. "Where is Austin?" I demanded. "Safe, learning. Would you like to see him?" Pastor Thorne gestured behind him. There, in a clearing that definitely hadn't been there seconds before, stood the ruins of an old church. Stone walls covered in moss, a bell tower that leaned at an impossible angle, stained glass windows that showed images I couldn't quite focus on, and standing in the doorway was Austin Miller. He looked exactly the same as the day he'd disappeared. Same hiking clothes, same backpack, same confused expression. But something was wrong with his eyes. They had that same hollow darkness as the girl and the pastor. "Austin!" I shouted, running toward him. But with each step, the church seemed to move further away. The ground under my feet felt liquid, unstable. Time stretched like taffy. I ran for what felt like hours but moved only inches. "He can't hear you," Pastor Thorne said, suddenly beside me, though I hadn't seen him move. "Not yet. He's still learning to listen properly." "What did you do to him?" "I saved him. From loneliness. From doubt. From the terrible burden of independent thought." The pastor's voice was hypnotic, reasonable. "I can save you too, Luke. You're so tired. Tired of responsibility. Tired of failure. Tired of making decisions that get people hurt." He was right. God help me, he was right. I was tired, bone-deep, soul-crushing, exhausted from 15 years of search and rescue, of carrying other people's lives in my hands, of never being quite good enough to save everyone. "Just rest," the pastor whispered. "Let someone else make the hard choices." The words wrapped around my mind like warm honey. It would be so easy to stop fighting, stop thinking, stop carrying the weight of every missing hiker, every failed rescue, every family I'd had to disappoint. I took a step toward the church. Then my grandfather's compass grew hot against my chest. The metal burned through my shirt, shocking me back to awareness. My grandfather had carried this compass through 3 years of Korean War hell. He'd never stopped fighting, never stopped thinking, never gave up his will to another man. Neither would I. "Get the hell away from me," I snarled, backing away from the pastor. His grandfatherly mask slipped. For just a moment I saw what was underneath, something ancient and hungry, wearing human flesh like an ill-fitting coat. "You will come to me willingly, Luke Patterson," he said, "or you will come to me broken. The choice is yours." The forest around me exploded into chaos. Trees bent into impossible shapes. The ground tilted like a ship in a storm. Reality itself seemed to be having a nervous breakdown. But I was a ranger. I navigate by landmark and compass bearing, not by what feels right. I follow protocol, not emotion. And Protocol 7 for supernatural encounters, which definitely wasn't in any manual but should have been, was simple. When reality breaks down, trust your equipment. I pulled out my backup GPS unit, the old analog one that didn't rely on satellites. The needle pointed steadily northwest, toward the real trail, toward sanity, toward home. I ran. Behind me, Pastor Thorne's voice followed. You cannot escape what you've already chosen to become. You will return, Luke Patterson. They always return. But I kept running, following the compass needle, until the impossible trees became normal pines, until the ground felt solid again, until I burst out onto Trail 847 exactly where I'd left it. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time. There, standing at the edge of the forest, was the little girl in the white dress. She waved at me with one small hand. In her other hand, she held Austin Miller's Ranger-issued emergency beacon, still blinking red. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Austin Miller. I read every single one. I filed my report the next morning. Search area deemed geologically unstable due to unknown seismic activity. Recommend permanent closure pending geological survey. The area was closed to hikers within 48 hours. But I know Pastor Thorne is still out there, in that pocket of reality that shouldn't exist. And Austin? God help me. I think Austin chose to stay. Because sometimes the weight of choice is heavier than the comfort of surrender. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't losing someone. Sometimes the hardest thing is accepting they don't want to be found. My name is Luke Patterson, and I should have forgotten the case of Austin Miller. But some cases never close. They just wait in the dark forest calling your name. The end, based on a true account as reported by Ranger Luke Patterson, Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Trail 847 remains closed to public access. My name is Dylan Thompson, and this was the 6th hour searching for Grace Murphy in the trails of Olympic National Park, when I first heard Samuel Blackwood's voice crackle through my radio, a man who'd been officially dead for 41 years. The November rain had turned the Salt Duke River Trail into a maze of mud and fallen Douglas fir branches, each step squelching with the kind of sound that makes your spine crawl. My Garmin GPS read 47.9517 degree N, 1 to 23, 8365 the Dazu W, coordinates that should have placed me at marker 4.2 on the established search grid, but something felt fundamentally wrong about where I stood. The trail curved in ways I didn't remember from 15 years of walking these paths, and the ancient cedars seemed to lean inward like they were listening to secrets I wasn't supposed to hear. Grace Murphy, 23 years old, archaeology graduate student from University of Washington, last seen 18 hours ago at the Salt Duke Hot Springs trailhead, wearing a red North Face jacket and carrying a weathered leather journal filled with research about pre-Columbian ritual sites. Her mother's voice on the phone that morning still echoed in my head. Please, Mr. Thompson, she's all I have left. Please bring my baby home. The metallic taste of exhaustion coated my tongue as I pressed the transmit button on my Motorola radio. Unit 7 to base, still no sign of the subject at grid sector Delta 4, proceeding northeast toward the thermal springs. Over. Static. Nothing but static. I tried again. Base, this is Unit 7. Radio check. Over. More static. Then something that made the hair on my arms stand up. A voice I recognized but shouldn't have. Warm and authoritative with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent decades in these woods. Unit 7, this is Ranger Station Alpha. We've got movement on the thermal sensors near the old growth section. Possible subject sighting. Coordinates 479523 Digien, 123.84 under 1 Dig W. Investigate and report. Over. I knew that voice. Every ranger in the Pacific Northwest knew that voice from the training recordings they still played at the academy. Samuel Blackwood, the legend, the ranger who'd written half the search and rescue protocols we still used, the man who'd walked into these woods in October 1978 to investigate a missing person case and never walked out. My hands trembled as I checked my GPS. The coordinates he'd given me were only 200 meters northeast, up a steep incline through old-growth forest that I'd traversed hundreds of times. But as I looked in that direction, the trees seemed different, older, more twisted, their bark scarred with symbols that looked carved but couldn't possibly be there. "Copy that, Alpha," I heard myself saying, en route to investigate. The first rule of psychological manipulation is isolation. Make the target question what they're seeing, hearing, experiencing. I'd learned this in my hostage negotiation training, but I'd never expected to be the target. With each step toward those coordinates, the forest grew quieter. Not peaceful quiet, predatory quiet. The kind where even the Douglas squirrels stop chattering and the Stellar's jays forget how to call. My boots, standard issue Danner Rangers that had carried me through a decade and a half of rescues, suddenly felt like they were sinking deeper into the earth with each step. The familiar weight of my pack, 35 pounds of emergency gear, first aid supplies, and rescue equipment, now felt like it was pulling me backward, as if the forest itself was trying to keep me from reaching those coordinates. The smell hit me first. Not the clean scent of cedar and fir needles I'd grown up with, but something underneath it. Something sweet and rotting, like flowers left too long on a grave. My radio crackled again. "Unit 7, be advised we're showing multiple heat signatures in your area. Exercise extreme caution, over." Multiple heat signatures. Grace Murphy and who else? I unclipped my mag light from my duty belt. Though the overcast November sky still provided enough light to see, my thumb found the familiar ridged pattern of the flashlight's handle, a detail that suddenly seemed incredibly important, like I was trying to anchor myself to reality through tactile sensation. "Alpha, can you clarify number and position of heat signatures?" "Over." "Unit 7. The voice was definitely Samuel Blackwood's, but now it carried something else underneath. Something that made my molars ache. "Unit 7, you're almost there. Just keep walking straight. She's waiting for you. She's waiting for you." Not the subject is located or possible visual on missing person. She's waiting for you. Like this was personal. Like Grace Murphy had specifically been waiting for Dylan Thompson to find her. I'd been a ranger for 15 years. I'd pulled hikers out of ravines, tracked lost children through blizzards, performed CPR on hypothermic campers until the medevac choppers arrived. I'd seen people at their absolute worst and most desperate, and I'd learned to trust my instincts about when something felt wrong. Everything about this felt wrong. The coordinates led me to a clearing I'd never seen before, which was impossible. I'd mapped every acre of this section of the park. I'd trained rookie rangers here. I'd brought my own daughter Emma here for father-daughter camping trips, pointing out the different types of moss and teaching her how to identify animal tracks in the soft earth. But here was a perfect circle of ancient Douglas fir trees, each one easily 8 feet in diameter, arranged in a pattern that couldn't be natural. And in the center of that circle, a ring of moss-covered stones that looked like they'd been placed by human hands thousands of years ago. Grace Murphy sat in the exact center of the stone circle, her red North Face jacket bright as blood against the gray stones. She was writing in her leather journal, completely absorbed in whatever she was recording, as if she hadn't been missing for 18 hours, as if her mother wasn't calling the ranger station every 30 minutes asking for updates. "Grace," I called out, breaking into a run toward the clearing. "Grace Murphy!" She looked up at me and smiled, and that's when I knew I was completely and utterly fucked. Because Grace Murphy's eyes were gone. Not injured, not damaged, gone. Replaced by 2 perfect pools of black water that reflected things that weren't there. And when she spoke, her voice carried the same undertone that had infected Samuel Blackwood's radio transmission. "Dylan," she said, and somehow she knew my name, though I'd never introduced myself. "I've been waiting for you. Samuel said you'd come." My service weapon, a Glock 22/40 caliber, was suddenly in my hand, though I didn't remember drawing it. 15 years of training kicked in. Assess the threat, secure the victim, establish communication with base. But every protocol I'd learned seemed inadequate when faced with a missing person whose eyes had been replaced by supernatural voids. Grace, I'm Ranger Dylan Thompson. Your mother sent me to find you. We need to get you medical attention immediately. She laughed, and the sound made every tree in the clearing shiver despite the complete absence of wind. Medical attention? Dylan, I've never felt better in my life. I've found it, you see. The place where the spirits cried blood. The ritual site that Samuel has been guarding all these years. Samuel. She was talking about Samuel Blackwood like he was still alive, still here in these woods. My radio erupted with static, then Blackwood's voice again. Unit 7, status report. Have you located the subject? I keyed the mic with my left hand while keeping my weapon trained in Grace's general direction. Base, I've found Grace Murphy. She requires immediate medical evacuation. Something's wrong with her eyes. Wrong with her eyes? Blackwood's voice carried what might have been amusement. Dylan, her eyes are perfect now. She can see things the way they really are. The way you'll see them too once you step into the circle. If this story's giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Dylan Thompson's situation? Comment below. Step into the circle. Every survival instinct I'd developed over 15 years of wilderness rescue was screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of this clearing and call for backup. But Grace Murphy was sitting there looking at me with those impossible black pools where her eyes should be, and I'd made a promise to her mother. I'd made a promise to bring her baby home. Grace, I need you to come with me. Your family is worried sick about you. My family, she repeated, tilting her head like she was trying to remember something from a half-forgotten dream. Yes, I had a family once, before I learned about the stones, before Samuel showed me what's really underneath the forest. The temperature in the clearing dropped 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. My breath came out in visible puffs and frost began forming on the metal parts of my gear. In November in the Pacific Northwest, this was possible, but unlikely. Combined with everything else, it felt like the forest itself was trying to tell me something. Grace, whatever you think you've learned here, we can talk about it later. Right now, I need to get you somewhere warm and safe. Warm and safe, she echoed, then stood up with movements that seemed to flow like water rather than the jerky, nervous motions I'd expect from someone who'd been missing in the wilderness for 18 hours. Dylan, do you know what happened to Samuel Blackwood? The question hit me like a physical blow, because I did know what happened to Samuel Blackwood, at least the official version. Missing person case in October 1978. Massive search operation involving multiple agencies. They'd found his ranger station vehicle parked at the Sol Duke trailhead, found his radio and some of his gear scattered along what appeared to be a hastily abandoned search pattern, but they'd never found him. Samuel Blackwood disappeared in 1978, I said carefully. He was declared dead in absentia. Grace's ruined face broke into a smile that was somehow worse than her missing eyes. Disappeared, she repeated. That's what they wrote in the reports, isn't it? But Samuel didn't disappear, Dylan. Samuel found what he was looking for. He found the truth about this place, about what lives in the deep woods where the old spirits still remember the blood sacrifices. My radio crackled. Unit 7, are you getting cold feet? Just step into the circle, son. I've been waiting 41 years to talk to another ranger about what really happened in 78. The voice was coming from my radio, but it was also coming from behind me. I spun around, weapon raised, and saw him standing at the edge of the tree line. Samuel Blackwood looked exactly like his photograph in the ranger station lobby, except for his eyes. Like Grace, his eyes had been replaced by pools of perfect darkness that reflected things that couldn't possibly be there. He wore his 1978 uniform, complete with the old-style campaign hat. But the fabric moved in ways that suggested it wasn't quite fabric anymore. "Hello, Dylan," he said, his voice carrying 41 years of isolation and something much, much worse. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. You've got quite a reputation in the service." "You're dead," I said, which felt like a stupid thing to say to someone who was obviously standing right in front of me. But my brain was struggling to process what I was seeing. "Dead?" Samuel laughed, and frost spread across the ground from where he stood. Dylan, I'm more alive than I've ever been. I'm part of the forest now, part of something so much bigger than those silly little search and rescue operations we used to run. What do you want? What do I want? He began walking toward me, each step leaving footprints that looked burned into the earth. I want you to understand. I want you to see what I've seen. 41 years ago, I was just like you, confident, experienced, certain that I understood these woods. I thought I was the apex predator in this ecosystem. He gestured toward the stone circle where Grace sat, watching our conversation with those horrible empty eyes. Then I found this place, the old circle, the place where the indigenous peoples made their offerings to the forest spirits for thousands of years before we ever set foot here. And I learned that there are things in these woods that are so much older and more powerful than any human being. My hands were shaking now, partly from the supernatural cold, partly from exhaustion, partly from the growing certainty that I was completely out of my depth. But I had a job to do. Samuel, I don't care what you think you've learned. I'm taking Grace Murphy out of here, and then I'm calling in federal backup to deal with whatever this is. Federal backup, Grace said from the stone circle, and her voice carried the same amused tone that Samuel's had. Dylan, what exactly are you going to tell them? That you found the missing person, but she's been possessed by forest spirits? That a ranger who's been dead for 41 years is still walking around these woods? She had a point, a terrifying, undeniable point. Samuel stopped walking when he was about 10 feet away from me, close enough that I could see the details of his corruption. His ranger uniform was covered in what looked like tree bark, as if the forest had been slowly reclaiming him for decades. His skin had the gray-green pallor of something that had been underwater too long. Dylan, let me tell you what really happened in 1978, he said. I was investigating a missing person case just like you are now. A young woman had disappeared while doing research on indigenous archaeological sites. Sound familiar? It sounded exactly like what was happening right now, and that realization made my stomach drop. She'd found references to this place in old tribal oral histories. Stories about a circle of stones where the spirits demanded blood sacrifices in exchange for protection of the forest. I thought it was academic bullshit. Anthropological curiosity with no basis in reality. Samuel's blackened eyes focused on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. But when I found her here in this circle, she told me things. Things about what lives in the deep places of the forest. Things about what happens to people who trespass in sacred spaces without understanding the price that has to be paid. And what price is that? I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to hear the answer. Service, Grace said from behind me. Eternal service to the forest spirits. Protection of this place from anyone who might disturb it or expose it or try to understand it without permission. The woman I was looking for in '78, Samuel continued. She'd made the mistake of trying to document this place. Trying to bring academic scrutiny to something that was never meant to be understood by outsiders. And the spirits? They don't like that. I was slowly backing toward the edge of the clearing, trying to put some distance between myself and these two things that looked like people, but obviously weren't. My radio was silent now, no static, no voices, just dead air that felt somehow more ominous than the supernatural transmissions. So what happened to her? I asked. She became the first guardian, Samuel said. And when I tried to rescue her, when I stepped into the circle to bring her out by force, I became the second. And now you want me to become the third. Not want, Dylan. Need. The circle requires 3 guardians to maintain the barrier that keeps the really dangerous things contained in the deep forest. For 41 years, it's just been her and me. We're tired. Grace stood up from the stone circle and began walking toward me, her movements still flowing like water, her black pool eyes reflecting things I couldn't identify. Dylan, you have a choice. You can step into the circle willingly, accept the responsibility of guardianship, and help us protect the forest from the things that would destroy it. Or we take you by force, Samuel finished. And then we go collect your wife Sarah and your daughter Emma, and we make them guardians too. The mention of my family hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sarah, who'd packed my lunch that morning and kissed me goodbye, who'd made me promise to be home in time for Emma's school play. Emma, 8 years old, who still believed her daddy could protect her from anything in the world. "How do you know about my family?" "Dylan," Samuel said gently, like he was talking to a confused child. "I've been watching you for years, watching all the rangers who work these trails, waiting for the right one, someone with enough experience to understand the responsibility, but enough to lose that the choice would be meaningful. My service weapon felt useless in my hands. How do you shoot something that's already dead? How do you protect your family from something that can apparently watch you without being seen? What exactly does being a guardian involve?" "You stay here," Grace said, "in the forest. You become part of it, like Samuel and I have. You learn to hear the voices of the old spirits, and you make sure that no one else finds this place. No archaeologists, no researchers, no curious hikers who stumble across something they shouldn't see. And if someone does find it, then you do what guardians have always done," Samuel said. "You protect the sacred places by any means necessary." I thought about the missing person cases I'd worked over the years, the hikers who'd disappeared without a trace, the researchers who'd vanished in areas where they should have been easily found, the experienced outdoors people who'd somehow gotten lost in terrain they knew like their own backyard. "How many guardians are there in other places?" "Enough," Samuel said. "The old spirits have sacred sites throughout the Pacific Northwest. Each one needs its protectors. And if I refuse? Then we take your family, like I said, and we make them understand the choice the same way we're making you understand it. Though children adapt to the transformation much more easily than adults." The thought of Emma, my bright, laughing 8-year-old daughter, with her eyes replaced by pools of black water, made me physically sick. "I need time to think." "No," Grace said, and suddenly she was much closer to me than she had been a moment before, as if she'd covered 20 feet in the time it took me to blink. "You need to choose. Now." My radio erupted with static, then a voice I recognized. My supervisor at the ranger station calling for a status update. "Unit 7, this is base. Dylan, we've lost your GPS signal. What's your current location?" "Over." I looked down at my GPS unit. The screen was blank, completely dead, though the battery indicator had shown 78% charge when I'd checked it an hour ago. "Dylan," Samuel said, "that radio call isn't real. We're in the deep forest now. The place where technology doesn't work the way it's supposed to. The place where time moves differently." "How long have I been here? Does it matter?" I tried to key my radio, but it produced only dead silence. No static, no carrier tone, nothing. "Your family thinks you're just out on a routine search and rescue," Grace said. "They're not worried yet, but if you don't make a choice soon, they're going to start looking for you, and then we'll have to make the choice for them." I thought about Sarah, probably making dinner right now, checking her phone for a text from me saying I was on my way home. I thought about Emma, practicing her lines for the school play, maybe looking out the window watching for my truck to pull into the driveway. I thought about all the families of all the missing persons I'd never found over the years, and wondered how many of them had faced this same impossible choice. "If I agree to become a guardian," I said slowly, "what happens to Grace? Can she go home?" "Grace made her choice," Samuel said. "She stays here with us." "And the original guardian? The woman from 1978? "She earned her rest," Grace said. "When you take my place, I'll finally be free to move on. A replacement system, an eternal cycle of forced guardianship, with each new victim allowing the previous one to escape." "Except that you won't let me go," I said. "Once I'm here, once I'm transformed, I'll be just as trapped as you are." "Trapped?" Samuel laughed. "Dylan, we're not trapped. We're home. We're part of something greater than ourselves. We protect one of the last truly sacred places on Earth. By kidnapping people and turning them into monsters. By doing what's necessary." I looked around the clearing one more time, taking in the impossible geometry of the trees, the ancient stone circle, The two creatures that had once been human beings. In the distance, I could hear something moving through the forest. Something large. Something that didn't move like any animal I'd ever tracked. What else is out there? Things that are much worse than us, Grace said. Things that the Guardians were created to contain. Dylan, if this circle fails, if the spiritual barriers break down, those things will be free to enter the world beyond the forest. What kind of things? The kind that feed on cities instead of individuals, Samuel said. The kind that turn forests into graveyards and rivers into blood. We're not the monsters here, Dylan. We're the ones keeping the real monsters contained. Another impossible choice. Become a monster to prevent something worse from being unleashed. How do I know you're telling the truth? You don't, Grace said simply. You have to choose based on incomplete information, just like every other important decision you've ever made. I thought about my training, about the search and rescue protocols I'd memorized, about the oath I'd taken to protect and serve the public. None of it had prepared me for this moment, for this choice between personal damnation and potential catastrophe. Dylan, Samuel said, and his voice had lost the supernatural undertone, sounding almost human again. I know this is impossible. I know it seems like a nightmare. But I need you to understand, I was just like you. I had a family. I had a life outside these woods. And I gave it all up because I realized that some responsibilities are bigger than individual happiness. And you think that makes it right? I think it makes it necessary. The sound in the distance was getting closer, and now I could identify it. Footsteps, but wrong somehow. Too heavy, with too much time between each step, like something that was much larger than human but trying to move quietly. That's one of them, Grace said, following my gaze toward the sound. One of the things we keep contained. If you don't take my place in the circle, the barriers will fail, and it will be free to hunt beyond the forest. How do I know this isn't all an elaborate hallucination? How do I know I'm not suffering from hypothermia or altitude sickness or some kind of psychotic break? You don't, Samuel said, but Dylan, ask yourself this. In 15 years of wilderness rescue, have you ever seen anything that couldn't be explained by natural causes? I had, actually. Tracks that didn't match any known animal. Disappearances in areas where people simply couldn't vanish. Equipment failures in locations where electronics should have worked perfectly. I'd always rationalized these incidents, filed them away as unexplained, but not supernatural. The forest has been trying to communicate with you for years, Grace said. You've just been too rational to listen. The footsteps stopped. Whatever was making them was close now, just beyond the edge of the clearing, waiting. What happens if I walk away? I asked. If I just leave this clearing and pretend none of this ever happened? You can't, Samuel said. You've seen too much. You know too much. The forest won't let you leave with that knowledge. So my choices are become a guardian or die. Your choices are become a guardian or watch your family become guardians, Grace corrected. Death isn't an option here, Dylan. The forest needs the living. I looked at my watch. 4:47 p.m. I'd been in this clearing for maybe 20 minutes, but my watch said it had been 3 hours since I'd responded to the coordinates Samuel had given me over the radio. Time moves differently in the deep forest. I have one more question, I said. Ask it. If I become a guardian, if I accept this transformation, do I retain my consciousness? Do I still remember being Dylan Thompson? You remember everything, Samuel said. But you understand it differently. You see how small and insignificant your old life was compared to the responsibility you've accepted. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. I thought about Sarah and Emma one more time. About the promises I'd made to Grace Murphy's mother. About the oath I'd taken as a ranger to protect people from the dangers of the wilderness. About the fact that I was completely and utterly out of options. If I do this, I said slowly, if I step into that circle, you guarantee that my family will be left alone? As long as they never come looking for this place, Grace said. As long as they accept that you disappeared in the line of duty and move on with their lives. And Grace goes free? Grace has earned her freedom. I looked one more time at the young woman who'd been sitting in this circle for 18 hours, whose eyes had been replaced by supernatural voids, who'd somehow known my name despite never having met me. Will it hurt? Only for a moment, Samuel said. And then you'll understand everything. I took a step toward the stone circle. Dylan, Grace said, and for just a moment, her voice sounded almost normal, almost human. Thank you. I took another step. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath in thick clouds that seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. Another step. My boots were now touching the outer edge of the stone circle, and I could feel something underneath the ground, something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. Just one more step, Samuel said, and then the transformation begins. I lifted my foot to step fully into the circle, and my radio erupted with static. Unit 7, this is base. Dylan, where the hell are you? We've got search teams converging on your last known position. Your GPS went dark 3 hours ago. The voice was my supervisor's, and it was definitely real this time. I could hear the genuine worry, the professional concern, the undertone of someone who was trying not to panic. Dylan, Grace said, and now her voice carried desperation. Don't listen to that, it's not real. The transformation is starting, you have to complete it. But the radio kept crackling with real human voices, with search coordinates and helicopter requests and all the familiar language of an actual search and rescue operation. Unit 7, if you can hear this, we're tracking your radio signal. Stay put and key your mic twice if you're in distress. I looked around the clearing one more time. Samuel and Grace were both watching me with their terrible black eyes, and the thing in the forest was moving closer, making sounds that no earthly creature should be able to make. But my radio was working. My GPS was starting to flicker back to life, and somewhere out there, real rangers with real helicopters were looking for Dylan Thompson, who disappeared while searching for a missing person. I lifted my foot out of the stone circle. Wrong choice, Dylan, Samuel said, and his voice was no longer even remotely human. The last thing I remember clearly is running through trees that reached for me with branch fingers, through a forest that rearranged itself to keep me lost, while behind me something that had once been Samuel Blackwood howled with rage and frustration. I ran until I saw helicopter lights through the canopy, until I heard the blessed sound of diesel engines and human voices calling my name through bullhorns. They found me unconscious at the base of a Douglas fir, 2 miles from the Sol Duke trailhead, suffering from hypothermia and exhaustion. I'd been missing for 6 hours. My GPS showed a track that made no sense. According to the satellite data, I'd walked in perfect circles for 3 hours, covering the same ground over and over again. Grace Murphy was never found. The official report listed her as missing, presumed dead due to exposure. Her mother still calls the ranger station sometimes, asking if there have been any new developments in the case. I transferred to a different park 6 months later. I told my superiors it was for family reasons, which was true enough. I couldn't stand the thought of Sarah and Emma living anywhere near those woods. But sometimes, late at night, I hear Samuel Blackwood's voice on my radio. Static-filled transmissions reporting new missing persons, new coordinates, new opportunities for me to complete the choice I started in that clearing. And sometimes I find myself driving toward Olympic National Park, drawn by something I can't name, knowing that there's still a space in that stone circle that's waiting for me. Grace Murphy is still out there, still sitting in that circle, still waiting for someone to take her place so she can finally rest. And every missing person case in the Pacific Northwest makes me wonder, how many other rangers have faced the same choice I did? How many chose differently? How many circles are there in the deep forest? And how many guardians are standing watch over things that should never see daylight? I don't know the answers to those questions. But I know that some responsibilities are bigger than individual happiness. And I know that someday I'm going to have to decide whether Samuel Blackwood was right about that. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror and comment your theory about what really happened to Grace Murphy. I read every single one. My name is Logan Hayes, and I should have forgotten the case of Emily Rodriguez. but something brought me back to that cursed forest. 6 months had passed since the 22-year-old psychology student vanished without a trace from the Cascade Mountain Trail in Olympic National Park, Washington. 6 months since I'd walked those same paths, calling her name until my voice went raw, finding nothing but an abandoned backpack and a single hiking boot with blood on the sole. The case was officially cold. The FBI had moved on. Her family had held a memorial service. Even I had been reassigned to the northern sector. But at 3:47 a.m. on October 13, 2019, my Samsung Galaxy S10 buzzed with a text that made my blood freeze. She's still alive. Grid reference 47-821 Diguangdian 123.66044 D Grid OW. Come alone. E. Emily's phone had been destroyed in the initial search. This message was impossible. I sat up in bed, my wife Sarah mumbling in her sleep beside me. The house felt wrong, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. My ranger instincts, the ones that had kept me alive for 12 years in these mountains, were screaming that something predatory was watching me through the darkness. I could taste copper pennies on my tongue, a metallic wrongness that made my stomach clench. I pulled up the coordinates on my phone. Deep in the restricted zone where Emily had vanished, the place where every fiber of my being had told me not to go alone during the original search, but protocol had forced me back. By 5:30 a.m., I was loading my Chevy Silverado with gear, Motorola radio, Garmin GPS unit, first aid kit, tactical flashlight, and my grandfather's .357 Magnum, the one that had never failed to put down a wounded bear. The October air bit through my uniform as I drove toward the trailhead, the heater struggling against supernatural cold that seemed to seep through the metal itself. The parking lot was empty, except for a rusted Ford Explorer that hadn't been there during the original search. Washington plates covered in grime like it had been sitting for months. I radioed my position to dispatch. Unit 47 to base, beginning solo reconnaissance at Cascade Mountain Trail, grid 47.802. Copy that, Logan. Weather service shows storms moving in by noon. Be safe out there. If only they knew what I was really walking into. The trail started normal enough. Douglas fir towering overhead, the familiar crunch of pine needles under my Danner boots, the smell of wet earth and decomposing leaves. But within a quarter mile, my skin started crawling. The forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals. Even the wind had died to an unnatural stillness. That's when I saw the first sign. Carved into a massive cedar, maybe 8 feet off the ground, were symbols that definitely hadn't been there during the original search. They looked like a child's drawing of eyes, dozens of them, bleeding black sap that stained the bark like tears. Below them, in letters that hurt to look at directly, the intuitive ones feed me best. My hands started shaking as I photographed the tree with my phone. The camera kept malfunctioning, showing strange shadows in the images that weren't visible to my naked eye. Shadows with too many limbs and eyes that followed the lens. I keyed my radio. Unit 47 to base. I've got some unusual markings on the trail. Possible vandalism or static. Dead static that sounded almost like screaming. That's when I heard Emily's voice calling from deeper in the woods. Logan? Logan, please help me, I'm hurt. Every rational part of my brain knew it was impossible. Emily Rodriguez had been missing for 6 months. But my intuition, that sixth sense that had guided me through every successful rescue, was pulling me toward her voice like a fishhook through my sternum. I followed the sound off trail, pushing through undergrowth that seemed to grab at my uniform with thorny fingers. The temperature was dropping fast, my breath misting in air that tasted like old blood and copper wiring. My GPS unit was spinning wildly, unable to lock onto any satellites. Emily? I called out, and immediately regretted it. My voice echoed back wrong, like something else was mimicking the sounds. The forest opened into a small clearing I'd never seen before, despite knowing these trails for over a decade. In the center stood a man in a ranger uniform from the 1980s, the brown and green outfit we hadn't used since before I started. His name tag read W. Thornton, and his face was exactly what I'd expect from a veteran ranger. Weathered, confident, competent. Except his eyes were holes. Not empty sockets, but actual holes that went so deep I could see stars twinkling in the darkness behind them. "You're late, Hayes," he said, in a voice like grinding stone. "I've been waiting for someone with your talents for years." The thing wearing Ranger Thornton's face smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. Emily Rodriguez was just the bait. I needed someone who could really feed me, someone whose intuition burns bright enough to sustain me for decades. My hand went to my sidearm, but my body wasn't responding right. The air around Thornton was shimmering like heat waves, and I could feel something crawling inside my skull, trying to turn my own instincts against me. "You feel it, don't you?" the creature continued. "That little voice telling you to run? That's not your intuition anymore, Logan. That's me, wearing it like a glove." Suddenly, my psychic senses exploded with false visions. Emily hanging upside down from a tree 50 yards to my left, her throat cut and eyes gouged out. Emily buried alive in a shallow grave to my right, clawing at the dirt with bloody fingernails. Emily impaled on broken branches directly ahead, still breathing but begging for death. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. Every direction my intuition pointed showed me Emily dying in a different horrible way. The creature was using my own abilities to paralyze me with terror. "Choose, Logan." Thornton's face grinned. "Which death is real? Your precious sixth sense should tell you. Unless, of course, you can't trust it anymore." If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Logan's situation? Comment below. My phone buzzed, a text from my wife Sarah. "Dad, where are you? Emma's soccer game starts in an hour and you promised to be there. Love you." But it wasn't from Sarah. It was from my 8-year-old daughter Emma, and she'd never written anything that mature. The creature was inside my phone, inside my memories, twisting everything I loved into psychological weapons. That's when I remembered what my grandfather had told me about the 357. "Sometimes, son, you don't shoot what you can see. You shoot what you know is wrong." I drew the magnum and fired 3 rounds into the space between Ranger Thornton's star-filled eyes. The bullets passed right through him, but the sound broke whatever spell was scrambling my senses. The false visions shattered like glass, and I saw the truth. Emily Rodriguez was there, alive but changed. Her skin had a grayish pallor, and her eyes were clouded white like a corpse's. She was hanging from her wrists by barbed wire wrapped around the branches of a dead oak tree, her body covered in symbols carved so deep I could see bone. But she was breathing. Somehow, impossibly, still breathing. "Logan," she whispered, her voice barely human. "It's been feeding on me for months, using my psychic energy to grow stronger. But it needs someone more powerful to complete the process." The Thornton thing's face was melting now, revealing something underneath that hurt to look at directly. A writhing mass of shadow and teeth and eyes that belonged to no earthly creature. "You can't save her, Hayes," it hissed. "She's already mine. But you're going to be so much better. All that beautiful intuition, all those years of successful rescues, all that confidence in your abilities. I'm going to turn it all into screaming terror." The creature lunged at me with appendages that defied geometry, moving through space in ways that made my eyes water. But as it reached for my head, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed again. This time it really was from Sarah. "Logan, I know you're chasing ghosts again, but we love you. Come home safe." The simple, real message from my actual wife hit me like lightning. Love. Pure, uncomplicated, human love. The one thing the creature couldn't understand or replicate. I felt my true intuition return. Not the twisted version the devourer had been manipulating, but the real thing. The sense that had guided me through hundreds of successful rescues, powered by my love for the people I'd sworn to protect. The creature recoiled as if burned. "Impossible. I control your senses now." "You control fear," I said, advancing with my grandfather's gun raised. But you can't control love. I emptied the remaining 3 rounds into Emily's chains while my intuition guided each shot with supernatural precision. The barbed wire snapped, and she dropped into my arms, solid and real and alive. The devourer shrieked as its power source was cut off. Without Emily's psychic energy to sustain it, the creature began to collapse in on itself like a dying star. "This isn't over, Hayes," it screamed as reality bent around its death throes. "I'll find you again. I'll find your family." "No," I said, pressing Emily's face against my chest to shield her from the sight. "You won't." I pulled the pin from the emergency flare in my belt and threw it into the creature's collapsing form. The magnesium burned white hot, and the devourer's screams cut off abruptly. When the light faded, we were alone in a normal forest clearing. No Ranger Thornton, no impossible geometry, just 2 traumatized people holding each other while October rain began to fall. Emily Rodriguez had been missing for 6 months, but to her it felt like years. The creature had kept her suspended between life and death, feeding on her latent psychic abilities while using her as bait for stronger prey. The physical wounds would heal, the doctor said later. The psychological ones would take much longer, but she was alive. My intuition had been right all along. Emily Rodriguez was still alive. The official report listed it as a successful rescue of a missing hiker who had been held captive by an unknown assailant. The strange markings on the trees were attributed to vandalism. The rusted Ford Explorer was never claimed and was eventually scrapped. Only Emily and I know the truth about what really happened in those woods. About the thing that wore Ranger Thornton's face and fed on human intuition like a parasite. About how love proved stronger than supernatural terror. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel something watching me from the shadows between the trees. But my intuition, my real intuition, powered by love for my family and dedication to protecting others, tells me that some things stay dead when you kill them the right way. Emily Rodriguez graduated with her psychology degree and now works with trauma survivors. She sends me a card every year on October 13th with the same message. "Thank you for trusting your heart when your head was lying." I keep that card in my wallet right next to a photo of Sarah and Emma. Sometimes the best compass isn't the one that points north, it's the one that points home. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Emily Rodriguez in those 6 months. I read every single one.